Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, DDoS Defenders Insights, How to Defend Against Reflected Amplification Attacks, presented by A10 Networks and our partner, ZCorum. Please note that all attendees are automatically muted, so use the chat window to ask questions or make comments during the Q&A session at the end of the call. As a reminder, this call is being recorded. As a thank you for attending today's presentation, you will be receiving a $20 gift card for lunch on us. But first, as we're waiting for more people to join the call, let's look and ask a polling question of our audience. We'll give you a few minutes to answer this question. So go ahead and submit the information as it relates to you. How confident are you that you will be able to quickly mitigate a DDoS attack against your network? We'll give everybody a few minutes to answer that. All right, let's see the answer here. So a lot of you feel that you're somewhat confident, 60%, while 40% think you're not confident at all. So as a reminder for attending today's call, everybody will receive a $20 DoorDash gift card for lunch on us. And remember to stay to the end of today's webinar for the raffle drawing, where we'll be giving away 3 Raspberry Pi devices. And now for our first guest speaker, Art Skinner, VP of Worldwide Sales for ZCorum. Go ahead, Art.
Tracy, thank you very much for that introduction, and I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar on DDoS, and I know how valuable everyone's time is right now during our current situation, so once again, thank you so much for attending. A little bit about ZCorum. So who are we? We are a company that's been in business now for 25 years. We're entering our 25th year this year, so we'll be celebrating that. And may see in the future at conferences. We'll probably be giving away some special items because of our 25th year. We are a privately held company, no venture capital in our business today. And we have our offices primarily in the state of Georgia. Our corporate office that you can see there in that picture is in the Alpharetta, Georgia area with a call center in Suwanee, Georgia. And then we also have 2 call centers. Those are located in the central and southern part of the state. One is in Swainsboro, Georgia, and one is outside of Macon, Georgia. What do we do? So maybe let's flip to the next slide here and just talk real quickly about what it is that we do. So in a nutshell, we're a managed services provider. Now, what does that really mean? Well, there are a lot of services and products that we provide to our customers today that consist of managed services. So that includes device activation, provisioning of products, provisioning of devices across different types of transport networks. And what transport networks do we support? Broadband network in general, but those networks that consist of fiber, DOCSIS, and wireless, and not a 5G or 4G wireless, but a fixed wireless network if you're delivering broadband services over those types of networks. We layer on top of that different types of ancillary services that an operator may need, such as email, voice over IP services, and then a suite of internet services to support those customers that could be needing security and things like that. Embedded within those managed services are products that consist of analytics and diagnostic tools. You can see at the bottom of this slide, we have branded specific products associated with those types of services that we offer: TrueVision, Pre-equalization Analyzer, SpectraVision, and Upstream Analyzer. All those tools are heavy analytic tools that can be used not only by a level 1 call center, but all the way into a deep level engineer to troubleshoot what might guide support have on a day-to-day basis. We also, in our call center, we provide that a 24/7, 365 service, and we do specialized call center products available to users who may not want, they may want to carve out different pieces and parts of that. Today, we're selling hardware through our partner that we're going to do this webinar with today with A10. And you can see in that bullet there that we provide DDoS and load balancers with our A10, and then we've enjoyed that relationship for a number of years. Our NOC and engineering services are superior to none, and that we provide that through our teams in the Atlanta office as well as some of our call centers. So with that, Tracy, I appreciate the opportunity to join with everyone today, and I want to turn it over to Ahmad. Ahmad, we are looking forward so much to hearing about this product today, and I appreciate it, and take it away.
Art, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure. I was hearing some static. Thought it was my line here. Okay, thank you for the introduction, and thank you everybody else for joining us today. And we chose a specific topic that I thought would be pretty important to cover, especially now because DDoS attacks are increasing. They're getting larger in volume and much harder to defend against. And what we want to do is today, we want to focus specifically on a specific type of DDoS attack, which is called the reflected amplification attack. We see a lot of these out in the wild. We do have a security intelligence group that briefs us on the different types of attacks, and these types of attacks are some of the most common on top of our security lists. So our aim today is to learn more about these reflected amplification attacks, try to understand what types of weapons are being used to launch these attacks, and also to build a strategy. And we'll give some tips at the end on how to effectively protect your network against these types of attacks. So let me go ahead and slide over to the next deck here. Okay, oops. I think I clicked too many times. Okay, so what you're seeing here is basically what I wanted to do is I wanted to start off with a brief refresher of what a DDoS attack is. And I'm sure many of you guys are already aware of what a DDoS attack is, and it's something that has been around for quite a while. It's one of the most popular tools actually used by attackers to launch DDoS attacks or any sort of attack. And the main objective of a bad actor to launch a DDoS attack is to basically disrupt service to legitimate users. They want to disrupt the availability of your important services. They don't want users to have access to those devices after they launch the attacks. So today we also try to understand why these services are becoming more available, why we're seeing these attacks, and more volume, etc. And some of the reasons for that, I can say, is that the attackers have they have more DDoS resources at their disposal. They can use companies such as the ones that are listed in the list here, the DDoS for hire services, to launch these attacks. These DDoS for hire services, sometimes called booters or stressors, they can be used to basically launch a multitude of different types of attacks using different types of weapons that they employ, and you can choose your delivery method, and all for the sole reason of bringing down the specific victim. And that victim can be a data center as listed here. It could be an application, users, gamers, etc. And one thing to keep in mind about DDoS protection is that it falls directly into the availability component of your what is it called? The information security triad, which is called it's called the CIA triad. So DDoS is an essential part of IT security, and you need to plan for it and be ready for these DDoS attacks when somebody launches, God forbid, against your networks. All right, so what we're seeing here is, who are the most impacted by these types of attacks. I mean, looking at the list there, the most attacked industries list, it's no surprise to see gaming at the very top. DDoS has always been an enemy of these guys. I mean, it's, they're easy targets. Money is involved, so the malicious actors are definitely going to go after these guys. We also see internet service providers on the list, and then followed by financial institutions, and that's very common. And actually, some of the other devices there that are listed are any institutions that have an online presence. So anyone can be a target of a non-service attack. Which then, what happens is that as a result of it, we've also found that about a third of all IT downtime is directly attributed to DDoS attacks, and it's a pretty big amount of reports that we've received that the downtime that they have suffered is a direct result of a DDoS attack, and that's something that was reported in the A10 IDG report. That's also available online. And also, one other thing to keep in mind is that whenever a company goes down, it costs them money. It's not cheap to keep those devices offline. An estimated amount or value is that every minute costs these guys about $5,600, which equates to over $300,000 a year. And also, another thing to keep in mind is that detection also plays a big role in downtime. Some of the companies reported that when they came under attack, it took them between 3 to 5 hours to identify that they were under attack. So they went down, and then it took them the same equivalent amount of time to bring that services back online. So you can see that they were down for quite a while, and we know that downtime is expensive. So this must have cost them a bit of money during that period. And again, organizations need to do something to be vigilant and put the best effort or the best strategy in place to protect themselves against these types of attacks, specifically these volumetric attacks and these reflected amplification types of attacks. Okay, so let's try to find out why sometimes we have customers that come under attack, right? So the question here will be, why do they do it? Why do attackers attack a certain entity? What is the motivation behind these attacks? I mean, there are a variety of reasons for launching DDoS attacks, and some of the reasons could be that, for a cyber criminal, it could be extortion, right? They want some money out of it. You could have a disgruntled employee that's trying to, maybe he's doing it for revenge. We can have activists that's doing it for a specific cause or a movement. We can also have political reasons behind the attack, or it could be because of a cyber warfare by a nation state. It could be to, for a reputation or against your competitors. It could be anyone. The motivations are far and wide. Actually, one other thing that we've also discovered is that some of these attacks are used to cloak other criminal activities. What I mean by that is that basically these attacks are used as a smokescreen. So what they want to do is they want to launch the attack to distract the security personnel, and then what they do is go through some back end and then illegally enter and hack in and basically steal valuable data. So as you can see, criminals have different reasons for why they want to launch these attacks, and also one other thing to keep in mind, and I'll get into this a little bit later, is that these attacks, specifically the reflected amplification attacks, they're pretty simple to use, and they don't cost that much. So we'll get into that later, but those are some of the motivational factors behind why an attack occurs. All right, so this motivation or the reason for launching attack, we understand that there's multiple motivations behind it or multiple reasons for launching these attacks. So now we need to understand how these attacks are launched, right? in many cases, what we see is that these attackers use DDoS for hire services. They seek out these DDoS for hire services, which are readily available. And what they want to do is they want to use a portion of these DDoS for hire services, or otherwise known as booters or stressors, a portion of their bots or botnets to launch specific types of attacks to any destination. And some of these booters even front as a SaaS, as a legitimate service. They even offer email support and tutorials, and that's why it's actually hard to take some of these guys down, because they pretend they're actually a legitimate service. But what these attackers do, again, their intent is to use these bots, rent them out from these bot herders, use the bots, and to directly attack some of the companies that they have a grudge with, or you know, any entity that they want to use as a target. And whenever we think of these types of attacks, or whenever we think of a volumetric attack, we usually think of these bots, these large number of botnets, being directed at a specific target. I mean, that is one way of launching these attacks, but that's not the common way. The reason for that is that these bots could be exposed. If they do a direct attack, their source IP addresses could be exposed. And that's not something the bot herders want done. And another reason is that for them to achieve the volume of traffic needed to bring down a specific service, they would also require more bots to be involved. And again, that would make it more expensive, so it wouldn't be feasible. So instead, what these bot herders have done is that they have scanned the internet looking for these devices called reflectors, or open servers. These open servers are intended to be used, or they offer a service to their clients, such as NTP or DNS or SNMP. And you know, they weren't intended to be used as part of the denial of service attacks, but that's what they're currently being used as. So these all the identified scanned reflectors are then used to launch the attacks. So the way it works is that the attackers launch the attacks from the bots with their source IP addresses spoofed to reflect the IP address of the target. And then when the open resolvers, or any one of these reflectors, when they respond to those sources, all that traffic, which is amplified, and we'll get into that in a little bit, all that amplified traffic is then sent directly to the target, and thus overwhelming the target with a high volume of traffic, and it goes offline. And again, some of the reasons why this is more attractive to an attacker to use a reflected amplification attack is that, you know, it doesn't take as many bots to launch these attacks. They actually utilize those open resolvers, or you know, the reflectors. Also, it hides their source IP addresses, and it makes it really cheap to use for the customers. You know, before I forget, one of the biggest attacks in DDoS attacks recorded in history was actually as a direct result of these amplification attacks. And that attack was the Memcached attack, which was used back in early 2018. And this attack basically, the attack size was 1.3 terabits, and that attack was targeted against GitHub. And then allegedly that was followed up by a 1.7 terabit attack 5 days later. So as you can see, these attacks can get extremely massive, and I can't remember off the top of my head how many sources were involved in that, but there weren't as many sources as you would expect for launching this massive attack. All right. So here's a list of some of the exploitable UDP services and their bandwidth amplification factor. This is which we call BAF. You know, we've got the service type and then the amplification factor. So this is the response that they send, which is much larger than the original request. As we see on the very top, we have BitTorrent. And BitTorrent has, you know, an amplification factor of about 4. So, you know, it could be used to launch attacks and cause some damage. But then right underneath that, we have Chargen, which is an older protocol used for testing purposes. And we can see that the amplification factor of that is almost 359. And if you go down a little bit further, we have memcached, and now we see the numbers are, that's off the charts. It's between 10,000 to 51,000, and we can see exactly why memcached was used to, or it was a part of the biggest ever DDoS attack that was recorded. Now, for some more bad news, our security intelligence team actually, they have a list of all these active weapons using the different services. And the number of services, memcached servers, available to be used as a DDoS weapon, they found it to be around 1.6 million servers. That's pretty massive. So if you think about it, these services, specifically memcached, can be used to launch even bigger and greater attacks in the future, but luckily that hasn't happened yet. We also see SSDP in the list. SSDP is, the Service Discovery Protocol. We also see SNMP and DNS, and a lot of these guys have been top sources for DNS or reflection attacks for the past few years. One thing that we also tracked with our security intelligence team is that we found about 1.1 million SNMP servers that are available to be used as weapons. And also we found that 1.9 million SSDP weapons were available to be used as a weapon. So again, those numbers are pretty big, and all these tools are available. What I'll do in let's see, maybe a few slides down, what I have is I actually have a whole list of these devices and how you can find them and how you can make use of them. It's actually a free tool. It's pretty cool. Okay, so let's just jump down and go into the DDoS weapons. So now that we know some of the reasons and how these attacks are conducted, we tried to look at some of the DDoS weapons and how they're distributed, right? Earlier we answered the questions of, where we see them or how we see them, what the numbers are. Here we're going to try to find out how common they are, right? How often we see them in the wild. Now, that's a really easy question to answer. We see these guys on a daily basis. I mean, DDoS attacks they're done or conducted by the thousands on a daily basis. The thing is that amplification is always, not always, but mostly on top of these lists. So whenever we run these reports to see how many attacks were detected for a specific day, we see amplification attacks to be on top of that list. And, there's no change here in this slide that I'm showing you right now as well. We can see about 61% of these attacks, 61% of them are the amplification attacks, or these UDP-based amplification attacks. And these are all conducted by those exposed servers that are vulnerable to reflection attacks, such as the ones I mentioned, the DNS, NNTP, and SNMP. And the other attacks that are listed on the top, those are mainly those are more direct attacks, but they're mainly run by malware-infected DDoS botnets. I'm not going to say there's not that many of them, because we see a ton of those as well. But, the amplification attacks are always, or will always be on top, because, again, they're very easy to launch, they're cheap, and they can cause the most damage for your buck. And that takes us to our next slide here, and this slide is the actual breakdown of that blue section of the previous chart, the blue section that had all the application attacks. So now we can see how these weapons for the application attacks are distributed, or how they're being used. And again, clearly some of these services that we're seeing on the list here, they should not be available on the internet. They should not be internet pointing to the internet or available, or they shouldn't even be accessing your network. So, some of the mitigation policies that we'll be recommending later are pretty easy, but those types of mitigation, those easy mitigations, doesn't apply to everything that's provided on the list. For example, SSDP, the Service Discovery Protocol, which is a UPnP device, right? It's mainly used for like your home routers and your cable box and some of the other devices, and they shouldn't be out on the internet at all. So, those are easy to take out. But again, I'll show you why some of these are a bit more complex to mitigate than what we think. Some of them are easy to mitigate, but some of them aren't. But again, the distribution is pretty even. But again, we see CLDAP and charge-in and SSDP and DNS being the biggest culprits, and we'll run through those in a little bit with you to make sure you understand how they work and how to protect yourself against them. So that brings us to this story. This is actually someone who used the DDoS for Hire service or multiple DDoS for Hire service to launch DDoS attacks against a number of different entities that he had a grudge against. And this guy, I'm sure you guys, if you guys are in the DDoS field, you know about him. His name is John Kelsey Gamble, and a couple of years ago, he was sentenced to about 15 years of prison for launching these attacks. His story goes that from around early 2015 to maybe sometime around mid-2017, what he did was he directed attacks, DDoS attacks, at different websites. And these attacks were, they included websites that were operated by his former employer. They were companies that, where he went for an interview and didn't hire him. And some of them were I guess one of them was against a specific law enforcement agency. And again, he's been arrested, sentenced 15 years in prison. But the most interesting part of this story is that it didn't cost him much. It was extremely cheap for him to launch these attacks. As you can see on the chart right here, he paid around $652, a little over that. And for that $652, he was able to get 30 gigs of dedicated bandwidth, and that included the unlimited boots. And again, this is from some specific DDoS for Hire service, or a booter, or one of those stressors. And some of them are listed there on the left side of, or I guess in the right in the middle. He used C-Stress, InBoot, and VDOS. So let me show you one of these actual, how these operations actually work. So DDoS was one of the, or VDOS, sorry, was one of the stressors that he used. And this is a pay-for-play DDoS for Hire service. And one thing to keep in mind is that if you actually try to search for this, it's not available. The site was taken down. But what we see here is that they offered reflected amplification attacks using spoof source IP addresses. So they made you feel confident that the sources were untraceable, and they would use different types of recursive DNS servers or SSDP servers as listed, NTP servers, etc. And all this to basically allow you for a specific fee to attack your any target. They also offer 24/7 customer care, and they all, the different levels of support. The starting level is the $30 a month, which I believe is for the amount of bandwidth, or maybe depending on the bandwidth, and probably on the number of attacks. The good news is, again, that a lot of these sites were taken offline by the FBI a couple of years ago, but unfortunately, just because some of these went out doesn't mean they're all gone. We still have our intelligence team is tracking a bunch of these guys, and they're still fairly easily available. Okay, so let me just run through the animation. So how do we properly defend our networks against these attacks, right? We need to strategize and break down the services into what's needed, what's required by your organization, which one of these services are critical and which ones aren't, right? Are they going to impact your organization if you try to block them or allow them? What should we do, and how will it affect your network? So those are some of the most, or some of the important questions to think about before you decide to completely block or do something else with these specific types of services that are readily available to launch as DDoS attacks. On the top left, we have a table listing some of the most commonly used services. These are DNS, NTP, and TFTP. Again, these are some of the services that are used with many organizations for DNS servers or for NTP or TFTP. And there's not a really easy solution on how to mitigate against attacks from these types of services. On the right, these are devices that shouldn't be on the internet, basically. And they're really easy to protect against because they use fixed sources. What I mean by that is that, some of these use a specific source IP address. And what we can do is that we can actually filter these out at the edge for those sources. So we can use source port blocking to protect our networks. And if you haven't done this already, that would be one of my recommendations right now is to, if you're not using these services, then go ahead and block these at the edge using source port blocking mechanisms. And then at the bottom left, what we see here is a table showing us the special consideration services. And these items or these services that are listed here, these are some of the services that are a bit more complicated to mitigate or protect against. What they do is these services use high ports for their responses, and it's not easy to use source port blocking to protect yourself against them. So for example, those two right there that are listed, the SSDP and TFTP. SSDP again uses port 1900, but some of the different devices or services that use SSTP, they don't actually use port 1900, but a large number of them, they use ephemeral source ports. So mitigating or building a specific mitigating strategy for that becomes a bit more complex and something that requires you to think a little bit harder. Same thing with TFTP. It uses port 69, but all the responses are on some random short-lived high ports. So again, we can't just use source port blocking. But again, we'll show you how to properly strategize against these types of services in a couple slides down. All right, so defensive strategies, right? We are not just but there are two different parts to consider when you're thinking of a good or a successful DDoS defense strategy. The first part is detection, and the other part is mitigation. So you have to have both. With detection, what happens is that you're proactively protected. Like you're not relying or you're not reactive where the attack comes in and then you're down for a certain amount of time, where I showed you in the beginning where detection was a key part of downtime. So that's why detection is a key part of a successful DDoS defense strategy. And the second part is that you want to make sure you have the right mitigation tools in place to surgically identify and mitigate before your services go down. So what we want to do is completely remove the downtimes. We don't want you to, or your networks or your organization to suffer as a result of downtimes. You want to make sure you have the right strategy in place to be able to mitigate these attacks before they cause any sort of damage. And as we see on the right side, there's two different types of deployments that we should consider for detection and mitigation purposes. And these types of detections are proactive deployment, which is listed on top. The thing about proactive is that this is where we deploy the devices. And you can have a single device. In this deployment method, you don't need two devices. But in a proactive deployment method, what you do is that you basically have a box, a mitigator sitting somewhere, and then you basically route all inbound traffic through it, and all outbound traffic goes through normal paths. So in that case, because the device has a built-in detector and a built-in mitigator, a single box can achieve all your detection mitigation requirements, and all the outbound traffic goes through normal path. And this is something that's pretty useful for some customers, like gaming customers or some enterprises that have some servers that require an always on or uptime or availability, which is, if that's critical, then you'll need to deploy something that's more in line. But we also have the reactive deployment solution to think about when it comes to a good DDoS defense strategy. The good thing about a reactive deployment, or before I get to that, a reactive deployment is where the mitigator is sitting out a path. So what you're doing is that you have these flow detectors deployed at different parts of your network where they collect sampled flow data from different edge devices. And those flow detectors give you visibility into what's going on in your network. Again, it's something that gives you a real-time view. It's what's going on your network. And then when an attack is detected or any kind of malicious activity is detected, what it can do is that it can, notify maybe a central manager or notify the mitigator, and then the mitigator can have all the route or all the traffic for a specific route or all the routes rerouted to that specific mitigator for mitigation. And that's how you protect yourself against DDoS attacks using the reactive deployment. Now, the reactive deployment is a fairly common deployment for service providers because, in many cases, service providers have a large presence globally, and they can't afford to have specific devices deployed at each one of their facilities or POPs, etc. So instead, what they do is they build these scrubbing centers and deploy them strategically in different geographical locations. And then when an attack is detected by these flow detectors, they can route the traffic from that specific attacked site to the closest mitigation or scrubbing facility. And then the traffic is cleansed, and then it's all sent back to the destination. So once we decide, what kind of deployment fits the specific network, then what we have to do is we have to agree and determine for the best mitigation strategy, right? For example, how do we block these types of attacks? Is using source port blocking, is this effective for us? Should we drop all fragmented packets during a mitigation or completely before it reaches us? Can we also use threat intelligence feed? Would that help us with these types of attacks? And also, do we try to use some sort of advanced tool or what we have in-house to protect ourselves against these types of attacks and other DDoS-related attacks? So all those factors have to be taken into consideration to build the appropriate defense strategy. Okay, so modern techniques. When it comes to modern techniques, what you need to do is look at the latest DDoS protection services that are available right now to you, right? There's a slew of devices and services that consider themselves next generation. But when you're looking for a modern tool or a next generation tool, what you want to do is that you want to look for something that provides automation and it also provides machine learning. And that's provided to give you that precise detection automatically, and then to automatically also identify these attacks and then surgically remove them without requiring any kind of human intervention. Automating the DDoS mitigation lifecycle, basically what it does is that it makes the whole DDoS defense a lot cleaner and more efficient. It also minimizes collateral damage. So it's a lot more effective. And, some of the legacy systems, I'm sure if you do some research or if you have something in-house right now or you've purchased something, some of these legacy DDoS protection services or vendors currently require at least 2 dedicated personnel to manually manage some of these incidents. And again, not to take away from them, but in many cases, a lot of these smaller enterprise-level customers or some other entities, they can't afford to tie their security personnel on managing a specific DDoS incident. And that's where the automation and machine learning comes into play, where it's a lot more efficient. Machine learning, talk about it. So we just talked about it a little bit, but this is something that's also required. We need to have some kind of intelligence in the next generation tools, DDoS protection tools, to be able or capable of intelligently identifying the normal traffic from malicious traffic. And that could be based on maybe behavior of the network or a shift in traffic patterns, et cetera. But if you do have this and combining it with a specific automated tool, you have a very efficient, a very precise, and a very surgical tool to use. We actually, what you're seeing here, this is part of our DDoS protection service offer. It's called Zapper. Zapper stands for Dynamic Attack Pattern Recognition Engine. The engine was specifically created to create signatures in real time, and that's to block any kind of DDoS attack patterns that we detect, or any kind of zero-day attack patterns that are detected. Zapper itself is, it's automated. It's built into the device itself, so it's not something where you feed signatures into a device. It's actually built into the device, and it dynamically creates signatures on the fly. And again, it uses a lot of unsupervised machine learning algorithms to what it does to identify the attack traffic based on some of those vectors that you're seeing in the middle, and then based on that, it creates the appropriate filter, and then it mitigates and protects your networks accordingly. So again, that's part of the next generation types of tools, where these guys can automatically identify what's a good traffic and what's bad traffic, and then apply the appropriate filter for it. And these filters are BPF, so they're really easy to read, so they're human readable. Okay, so where are these weapons coming from, right? Where are the attacks coming from? Here, what we need to do is we need to have a proper threat intelligence list to help you with your DDoS strategy, right? The benefit of having a DDoS threat intelligence list is that it automatically, or it's something that takes the guesswork out of identifying what sources are malicious, because the threat intelligence list already provides these malicious sources, and you don't have to validate sources and authenticate them to verify that they're legit or if they're a bot, because it's already done for you. It makes that job so much easier. And that's exactly what we've done here. This slide that you're seeing, this is from our actual webpage. It's a free webpage that we provide. It's a free service that we provide to our customers. You can actually see it right now. You can go to threats.a10networks.com, and you'll get the real-time view and the real-time numbers of what we're seeing, or how many of these devices we've detected. The way we compile the information for the specific web page is that we actually scan the internet the same way the malicious actors used to scan for those reflectors, and then we identify those reflectors. We also have a few other ways of doing it, but combined, we identify each one of these devices that are being used as a DDoS weapon, and then we list them here. And one thing about this is that this can also be actionable. So the information that you're seeing here is not just the static information, it's also actionable as well. And I'll get into that in the next slide. All right. Okay, I think that's all the animation. Okay, so here's our actionable threat intelligence service. This is something that is automatically fed and updated on the devices. And the reason for that is that, the interval for these updates could be anywhere from 2 hours to whatever you decide to set it to. But 2 hours is pretty current, and it keeps our customers continuously protected from any kind of known malicious source. And, again, it removes all that guesswork of identifying who is legit and who's not. The list that you're seeing here, this is something that's customizable also. The way we compile this data is that we have multiple data sets that we track, and we also partner with ThreatStop to provide you this list. And this is in the millions, as you can see some of the numbers. They're pretty massive. And with this, you get access to a portal where you can customize the feeds that you need. And if you don't need anything, you can, not use it, etc. But all that is available, and this really does take the guesswork away. And this is a very efficient way of protecting yourself against some of these reflected DNS attacks. And on the bottom right side there, just quickly, you're seeing some of the device lists that we have, and the capacity that they can support, the whitelist or blacklist capacity that's available for them. So looks like our time. Let me just go to the next slide really quickly. Here's some of our recommended mitigation strategies for some of these services. We thought it'd be a good idea to give you guys this during this session, so you guys can go back and maybe, after doing some research, to maybe implement some of these, like blocking source ports for specific types of services that are not needed on your network. So if you want to screenshot this, please do so. Some of those that are listed for blocking the source ports are some of the ones we already discussed: the BitTorrent, Chargens, CLDAP, etc. But a few of those are not as easy to mitigate, such as the DNS, as I mentioned. They're a common protocol. So what do? An effective way of mitigating these is to basically drop the fragmented packets for any DNS request over port UDP53, and also to use it in conjunction with the threat intelligence list. Also NTP, we recommend that you block the MON list, and also use the threat intel list in conjunction with that. And same thing for SNMP, block the source port in conjunction with the threat intel list. Okay, and that brings us to our final couple of slides here. So who is A10, right? Who is A10 and what makes our DDoS solution one of the best in the market? I mean, you don't have to take my word for it. You can read some reviews. We've passed multiple certifications to show that our product lines are extremely effective when it comes to DDoS detection and mitigation. It was specifically designed from the ground up to provide this protection. So what A10 is that, at A10, we've been involved in the DDoS protection field since around 2014. And, that's initially when we started offering the service. And then it has, grown and expanded since then. And again, to offer some of the most advanced tools needed to protect your networks against the latest DDoS attacks, and specifically these reflection attacks and the multi-vector attacks, which are really hard to mitigate. Some of the numbers that you're seeing here for detection, again, extremely precise. We use about 28 different indicators. These indicators are different types of traffic sessions and values that we track, which gives us a much more granular picture of what's going on in your network than utilizing, say, a PPS or BPS for specific protocols. And then that also completely eliminates false positives. So we have a more accurate picture of what's going on in your network, and we can more precisely decide which one of those are, actual legitimate traffic and which ones are attack traffic. As I mentioned, automation, that's another key part of our solution. When it comes to our mitigation, we utilize a 5-level escalation policy, and this policy can be customized in different ways. But again, the whole thing's automated, where level 0 we can use for peacetime traffic, and then the higher it goes in the escalation level, the more scrutiny can be applied to the actual traffic. And again, that lets us be extremely surgical when it comes to DDoS protection. Jumping over to the next slide here, shows our scaling capability, basically our performance. Our performance by far, as you can see, some of these numbers are some of the best in the industry. And what you can do is you can actually, if you go to our website, we do have our data sheets that lists, the latest performance numbers for all our devices, and we can easily blow some of our competitors out of the water with what we can provide in a 1-rack unit device than what they can, and some of them are listed here as well. For example, the flow detection capabilities, a single box can basically process up to 6 million flows per second. I mean, that's 22 times greater than our competitors. We can track multiple sources. We can have multiple or simultaneous mitigations at the same time. That's, if you guys are pretty familiar with DDoS technologies, that's something that a lot of our competitors also struggle with. And then affordability, performance by design. These boxes were created to reduce cost and give you basically the biggest bang for the buck. And also, with all this, you also do get the support and the integration. These devices are open, and they can be, if you have your own integration tools that you need these to integrate with, that's also really simple to do. And I believe that is my last slide. So I'm going to go ahead and move to the Q&A. Did we have any questions? Let me just check. I know I went through some of these pretty fast. Let's see. Okay. Here's a slide. It said earlier, or a question, I'm sorry. I'll just answer a couple of these. Earlier, it was mentioned that the different DDoS protection deployment options available when considering our DDoS protection strategy. Why would service providers choose out of path options over the inline options? I think I explained that a little bit earlier, but again, it's one of the main reasons is to save cost, right? What the service providers are one of the things that they're concerned about is the volumetric attacks. They're not really concerned with the application layer attacks, and they're willing to pass that on to their customers. But when it comes to volumetric attacks, they can easily detect it with those flow detectors, and that's easily identifiable. And then, they can use one of those multitude of different scrubbing centers to redirect the traffic to. Again, using a certain amount of scrubbing centers will allow them to save costs. So what they do is they use slightly bigger boxes to build these mitigation facilities instead of deploying inline devices at each one of their POPs, which could get expensive really fast. All right, so let's look at the next question here. Try to go through this quickly. Layer 7. Okay, it says layer 7 DDoS protection really necessary since most of the attacks mentioned are volumetric. Yes, actually, these are, we still see a lot of these. I mean, we had a report, I think it was late last year, which showed that, of the, I think it was for Q3 of 2014, of the, all the DDoS attacks that were detected, 56% were volumetric. I mean, that's, that's not surprising, but 49% of those were application layer attacks. And also one of our, I think there was a report that came out last year that stated that, one of the biggest application layer attacks that was detected, or one of the biggest attacks that was detected last year involved an application layer attack. So that is pretty important, and you should be concerned about application layer types of attacks. Okay, any other questions here? How does device trigger? Let's see, how does the device trigger to start scrubbing traffic? Okay, again, these could be a manual process or it could be an automated process. The way our devices automatically trigger it is that, we have, and again, depends on how the device is deployed. If we have a reactive solution where the service is being used as an on-demand solution, what you do is you deploy these flow detectors at the edge. These flow detectors then report directly to a central manager, which we call the A-Galaxy. If the flow detectors detect any kind of attack, they'll notify the A-Galaxy manager. The A-Galaxy manager then sends an API call to the mitigator, and then the mitigator makes a route announcement, basically makes a BGP announcement to the upstream router, and then it makes itself the next hop for whatever IP or prefix that was under attack. And then thus, the upstream router will basically redirect the traffic to that mitigator, and then the clean traffic is sent back to the destination. And then when the attack subsides, all the traffic goes through normal path. So that's how the traffic is triggered, and then that's how the scrubbing starts. Okay, let's pricing. I'm going to leave that off for now. I'm going to let somebody else answer that one. How does the device trigger start? Port blocking. Yes, you're absolutely right. Port blocking, doesn't always work for some for ISPs. You can't really do that, and that's why I mentioned some of the other methods where we use the threat intelligence lists, the next generation DDoS protection tools, and where we utilize the automation and the machine learning to identify these attack patterns instead of solely relying on just source port blocking, because you can't even do that for some of the other services or some of the more commonly used services. And I'll do one more here. Let's see. I think we got most of these guys. And yeah, I believe that's it. Your example, let me see one more here. Your example of how easy and inexpensive it is to hire DDoS services is troubling. I realize it's hard to predict how these services will evolve price-wise, but from my perspective, I can't I can't see the cost of the DDoS attack going up, only down. What do you think? You're absolutely right. I mean, you know, there's, as I showed you in one of those early slides where we have our threat intelligence map, the map shows millions upon millions of these compromised devices being used as weapons. So these numbers are not going to go down. And another thing to realize is that these reflected amplification attacks allows these guys, some of these bot herders, to not even have as many bots to launch these massive attacks, right? I showed you that it's, you know, a smaller number of bots is required to launch the attacks. And in some cases, they can even use maybe servers, like high-powered servers, maybe a couple of high-powered servers, to continuously send these requests to these reflectors with a, you know, a spoofed source IP address, et cetera, to overwhelm the target. And I hope I answered all those questions. And I guess, Tracy, back to you.
Great. Thank you, Ahmed. And thank you, Art. I wanted to thank all of the attendees for participating today and giving us some of your time. As a reminder, after the call, we will be automatically sending you your $20 gift card. So look for that coming in your inbox. And it's an automated gift card that you can just upload into a portal and retrieve it right away. So I wanted to let you know that. And so now on to our raffle winners. Let's see. I'm going to announce the 3 off on this call. So the lovely Raspberry Pi devices. These are cool little desktop computers that can fit the palm of your hand. So I'm going to announce off the first name and the company name of those winners, and then Rick or someone from his team at ZCorum will be in contact with you to get you those devices. So drum roll, please. The first winner is Charles from Gibson EMC. Congratulations, Charles. Let's see. We have Brett from Haviland Telephone. Congratulations, Brett. And the third person is Matt from Eastern Shore of Virginia Broadcast Authority. Congratulations to our winners, and thank you again for everybody attending today's webinar. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.